Okay, so for those of you who don't know me, my name is Charlii Parker. I'm a digital accessibility consultant with Digital Access at Vision Australia. As the name suggests, we are the digital accessibility consultancy working from within Vision Australia. And while Vision Australia is Australia's leading provider of blindness and low vision services, enabling tens of thousands of children and adults to live the life they choose, we at Digital Access are a pan-disability consultancy, so we take a holistic view of disability and digital accessibility. And for today's webinar, we have a very special guest panelist, Mr. David Woodbridge.
Hello.
So, it's David on your screen there. For those you can see, I've got a very long introduction to go through, and but I'll try and keep it as quick as possible. So David lost his sight when he was 8 years old and had to learn Braille. Since then, he completed high school, went to Sydney University, receiving a social work degree, spent 4 years drug and alcohol counselling before moving into his current job as the National Commercial Assistive Technology Advisor for Vision Australia, and has been doing that for some time. I haven't put in exactly how long for. As a blind person, David believes that as a user of the technology that he recommends to others, he is well situated to look at the strengths and shortcomings of assistive technology that he comes across in both his professional and personal life, in particular mainstream technology that is accessible. In the last 15 years, he's been involved in evaluating technology for use by people who are blind or vision impaired, including products from Microsoft, Samsung, Google, Amazon, and Apple. He's been an Apple ambassador for Apple Australia since 2009, and with a group of other ambassadors or Apple Distinguished Educators, ADEs, covering the range of Apple's accessibility solutions throughout Australia. David has been on the Microsoft Windows Narrator board since 2018, and as well as running tech sessions at the Vision Australia retail store, David also produces a range of podcasts. So thank you for joining us today, David. I'm not sure if you have anything further to add to my introduction.
No, that's fine.
I have everything covered there.
I think so.
All right. So the issue of digital accessibility has been around since the dawn of the web. As consultants, we like to quote Sir Tim Berners-Lee, who said, and I'll paraphrase, that the web should be accessible to all, accessed by everyone regardless of disability from any device. That was 2 quotes that I've converted into one. We've had the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, WCAG, since 1999. But where are we at now? So are we any closer to achieving Sir Tim's vision? When creating these slides, I started with the title 5 Common Accessibility Mistakes, but on reflection, they're perhaps more oversights. Simple things that are often missed or overlooked. The list is not exhausting, but include the 5 most common things that we still see when auditing, and they're fairly simple things. It's not like there are, we see a lot of things with new and emerging technologies where the accessibility is perhaps still catching up, but these are things that we see that are quite simple oversights. Things like missing alternative text, missing or incorrectly labelled forms, empty buttons, empty links, and contrast errors. So as we go through them, I'll be touching on the issue, and David will be sharing his experience as a screen reader user and also talking about some of the others that he comes up against. So our first one is missing alternative text. So alt text is the text for images that, or non-text content that you have on your page. All images need an alt attribute. They don't necessarily need alt text. And I'll pass over to you, David, to discuss your experiences with alt text and perhaps missing, inconsistent, or...
Yeah, look, I mean, overall, I'd have to say it's a lot better. I mean, I started doing web testing back in, 2004, I think. So back then it was absolutely horrific. But now when you even mention the word alt text to people, most people have a rough idea what you're talking about. And sometimes it's not so much the fact that the missing links, because some people lovingly have put the fact that there is a graphic on the screen or an image or a photo and actually lovingly alt tagged it as a photo. So the thing that I always begin with is, does alt tagging, besides hyperlinks, does alt tagging a photo or an image or a JPEG, whatever you want to call it, on a screen, give the same level of experience it does for other users that don't have a disability, or in my case, blind or low vision. So that's the premise that I always work on. And the other thing about hyperlinks in general with the alt text on those is there are some common themes that I don't know if I've noticed it more and more, but I was even on the Sydney Morning Herald website this morning, have a bit of a wander around to have a look at the website. And I even noticed that they sometimes do this, and that is when you call links by the same name, but they go to a different resource. So let's say you had, let's make it simple, you had document 1, document 2, document 3. So the first document talked about dogs, cats, and then birds. But all the document links names were read here, read here, read here, or even worse, click here, click here, click here. Or the common one is go to document or for more information. Now, it's the same link name, but it goes to 3 different sources. So I always say to people, please make your links descriptive, because if you don't, especially when a person's just tabbing with the tab key through a website, all they're going to be hearing is click here, click here, click here, or more information, more information, more information. And I know that people that are familiar with screen readers know that you can read around the hyperlink information for context, but to keep it nice and simple and straightforward, it's really nice to have meaningful text on those hyperlinks. So to me, sort of that's one of the major ones, is always have clear hyperlinks. And just one brief quick one too, is I know some people combine the header tag element also with a hyperlink, which means me as a screen reader, I not only hear the word link when I'm reading the screen, I also hear the header as well, which can get a little bit overwhelming. That's probably more of a nice to have, but the real killer is really the good old, go more document, click here, that sort of stuff. Back to you, Charlie.
Excellent, thank you. So we'll move on to our second one, which is missing form labels. So if a form control doesn't have a properly associated text label, then the function and purpose of that form control isn't presented to screen reader users. They don't know what that form, that input field might be. They don't know exactly where they're going in a particular form or what needs to be entered, and can lead you to a whole lot of errors and issues and mistakes that you have to try and fix without knowing exactly what you're trying to fix. Again, David, is this something you come up against?
Yes, absolutely. So the horrible one, and unfortunately, one of my main podcasting website is a bit guilty of doing this a little bit, not too much, but it's where you come across a button and it's just the control button on the screen. There's no indication if it's in my case, a publish now button, a delete draft button, or whatever else it might be. So that's that one. When it comes to edit fields, and again, I come back to my tab example, because when I normally investigate a website, the first thing I always do is tab through the tab order just to see what it's like. And when I get to a series of tabs, a series of edit fields, normally when the form is properly done, it'll say first name, last name, address 1, address 2, city, state, suburb, country, etc., etc. When it's not labeled correctly, all I hear is edit, 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 combo box, checkbox. And one of the other interesting ones is sometimes it has, please examine, when obviously you haven't filled in this form correctly, please look at the red cross beside the field, which is actually very, very hard. The other one is some web developers say that you can only put a number in a certain way. So it might be the first 3 digits, then the last, then the next 4, and so on. And that's shown visually. So that's a little bit hard. But look, overall, and you get to know the websites that you can visit, that the forms are pretty good. And I have to say, if I jump back 16 years ago, overall navigating forms for me is better. And that's not only because web developers have put more work into making sure the websites are accessible, but it's also the fact that the screen reading technology that I use on the Mac, Windows, Android, and iOS, iPhone, iPod Touch, or iPad, has actually come a long way. So while we're focusing on these particular, the sort of the things that still exist, overall, it's a lot better than it was 16 years ago, which is fantastic.
Excellent. Okay, so our third one is, as you mentioned, empty buttons. Descriptive text must be present to indicate the function of the button to a screen reader user. Often buttons will just say button, or sometimes they will say button button, and a button is no more descriptive than a button if no matter how many times you mention the word button. So David, you did mention this one before, using buttons that aren't labeled.
Yeah, and look, I know we're only talking about the web stuff at the moment, but this is also absolutely relevant to apps or applications. So applications on Windows, Mac, or apps on Android or iOS. Because coming across against a button, and look, even Zoom here today, even the Zoom meeting we've got, I've come across a few buttons as well while I'm at it. But you know, just being able to just label a button means you've gone from 0 access to 100% access. There's no in between. If you've labeled a button correctly, and also I should say, not just the label of the button, but make sure that the state of the button is also accurate. So if a button's a combo box, a checkbox, a radio button, then all the attributes that make up that particular control also have to be valid. Because I know about 5 or 6 years ago, there was this huge, I don't know, it was a trend at the time. Everybody was doing their own custom controls, which caused havoc. So basically, if you can use the standard control elements for a control and then also label it appropriately, not only do you know it's a checkbox, but you know what type of checkbox it is for a particular item. So that's also very important.
Awesome. Now, our next one is empty links. So links with no text at all, or as again you mentioned before, David, the read more, click here links. Link text should be unique and meaningful even when read out of context. I don't know if you use the option when you use your screen reader, Dave, but you can bring up a list of links with a screen reader and it lists all of the links on the page. And without knowing where that link fits on the page and the context of what's around it, sometimes it's really difficult. Sometimes the link can just be a number, just number 1 or something like that. So again, your experience, David.
Yeah, look, that's a horrible one. I mean, particularly when you're tabbing through, or even when you're arrowing around the screen with the screen reader, it's you know, it's really off-putting to hear it going link all the time, or even worse, link image. That can get a bit overwhelming as well. So again, simply labeling that would be actually really, really good. Not even labeling it, texting, I mean.
Texting. Now, the last one, which is probably one that you don't come up against very often, David, is low contrast. But it is something that we do see a lot. When contrast doesn't have the correct ratio, people with color blindness issues, people with low vision, and even people who are aging find it really difficult. Quite often, from an aesthetic point of view, we see a lot of grey on grey text. The website looks aesthetically pleasing, but it's not necessarily easy to use, and sometimes whole entire elements can be lost to certain members of the community because they just can't see the controls or the words on the screen with the background and foreground contrast color. There is a color contrast checker that is available on the Vision Australia Digital Access Resources link, which I will post into the chat box later as well. But these are all things that you can check yourself. They're not really major, highly technical issues. They're things that you can actually check on your own website and look at them before your website gets published, or even if it is already published, go in and have a look now. But now I'll pass over to you, David, to talk about other issues that you come up against, and also new and emerging technologies and where you see things going.
I also want to make a comment on that contrasting too, is that particularly with our aging population, so eyes getting worse over a period of time as you get older, it's really important to have good contrast on web pages. And I know, again, we've got inbuilt accessibility or third-party accessibility, but my sort of rule of thumb is the old keep it simple, stupid type of acronym, because the less somebody has to fiddle around to get and read your website, the better off they are. They're more likely to keep using it, rather than having to go, oh, I've got to adjust the font, or I've got to adjust my contrast, or I've got to turn my screen magnification on, or I've got to increase the font size, all that sort of stuff. The more fiddling somebody has to do, it's like any technology, the more fiddling it's involved, the less likely they are to stay on that website. And again, this goes to applications. But interesting, the other day, somebody did ask me, what do I spend most of my time on these days? Do I spend most of the time on my Surface Pro, or do I spend most of the time on my Surface Pro on my Mac, or is it my iOS devices or Android? And I'd have to say probably most of the time now for information sharing, and this is not content creation, but information, checking information, reading RSS feeds, checking websites, all that sort of stuff is done on my iPhone or my iPad. Because I find particularly the mobile versions of websites, for me in particular, are a lot easier to navigate. I just find every time I hit a full-blown desktop website, it tends to be extremely busy. And when I'm just after certain bits of information, I just find it a lot easier to use the mobile version of the website, or to use an actual app, which also is to do with that particular website or information. So for example, I'm more likely to use the Coles app or the Woolworths app rather than using the website, even though the website's actually extremely good. I find as a screen reader user on the iPhone, I'm a lot faster at doing that than I am on the desktop, whether it's the Surface Pro or the Mac. So that's number one. The next one I just wanted to also mention is people sometimes get a bit confused, and I know we're focusing on screen readers here, is how websites read information off a website. So it does it in two main ways, and I'll get onto a third way in a minute, which is for low vision people or people with dyslexia, which is also quite handy. So basically, when you tab around a website, and I mentioned this before, the screen reader will read wherever the focus is moving on the screen. So it'll say link or checkbox or button or edit field and so on. So that's your normal tab and shift tab commands. When a person wants to read the context around those hyperlinks or controls, then they use what's called a virtual screen reader mode. And different screen readers call this by different names, but it's basically turning the web page into almost like a Microsoft Word document. So rather than just having to limit myself to tab and shift tab, I can just read it from top to bottom as if it was a Word document. I can use up and down arrow to read up and down line by line. And every time I come across a different web element, it'll be spoken. If I come across text, it'll just be spoken as normal words, and so on. So for example, it'll say heading 1, business news, heading 2, local business news, and then the text. So that's actually quite good. Now, the problem with that from a sighted person's point of view is it's very hard to work out where the person's actually reading, because they're reading this virtual document. So you can say, well, look, if you go down to can you tell me where you're having problems? Because I can see an issue perhaps on the third column about 2 items down, or can you go to the navigation links on the left-hand side of the page? Now, for a screen reader user, that makes absolutely no sense because they're reading this virtual screen. So that's why it can get a bit hard for developers to work out what the issues are, because they're not experiencing this way. Now, there are tools that you can get a web page to act as if it was using a screen reader, which is actually quite handy. And if you wanted to play with both this standard way of navigating website and this virtual mode, keep in mind on Windows, particularly under Windows 10 with the latest build with Narrator, you can turn that on using the Windows command Control Windows and the Enter key. That will turn on and off Narrator, which is the built-in screen reader for blind people and people want to use screen readers. Or if you want to turn it on your Apple Mac, if you're using a Mac with a standard keyboard, it's just the Command key plus the function key 5, Command F5. Or you can also turn it on via, if your Mac has got a touch bar, via associating it with the shortcut key under Accessibility under System Preferences. And that's where you can hold down the Command key and press your power button 3 times to turn it on and off. And of course, on iOS, iPhone, iPod Touch, or iPad, you can just say to our lovely friend, Siri, Siri, turn on VoiceOver, Siri, turn off VoiceOver. And on Android, or the Samsung phones, which is what we tend to recommend at Vision Australia, you can turn it on under settings, accessibility, and you can also assign a shortcut button to turn that on and off as well. And like I said, they all work similarly. Now, the reason why I'm bringing this up, particularly with the virtual mode, is so you go to a web page and you think, okay, so I'm going to test navigation here. So I'm going to go to my edit field and start typing for a search or doing something like that. The problem is, if you're in this sort of virtual mode, each key on the keyboard stands for a navigation element, such as B for button, C for combo box, E for edit field, F for form, G for graphic, H for heading, and so on. So if you start typing to your heart's content, you're actually navigating the web page via that mode. Now, VoiceOver and talk back, don't do that if you're using the screen, as in touching the screen with the speech. It does do that if you're using a Bluetooth keyboard. But if you're using Narrator on the Surface Pro, VoiceOver on the Mac, then absolutely, it'll use those navigation keys to navigate the website. And there is a function where normally when you go into an edit field, the screen reader will then turn that mode off. So you really are using the web page you can type into the edit field like Google. So I'll leave that there because I won't go into too much to it. Can I just get either a show of hands with Charlie can tell me, does everybody understand, particularly on a touch screen, how screen readers work in navigating a web page or just even the iOS interface in general? If you do, then I won't bother going through it.
So we are getting a few hands up. 5. So currently we have 7 out of 130.
Okay. Okay. So, okay. Well, look, let me just do this quickly. Let's go turn this on. All right. So
messages, 11 red messages. Screen
let me
recognition.
just turn this down a bit. Slow it down.
Template, activities, dog, language, hints, sounds, punctuation, audio ducking, dog, volume, audio ducking, volume, speaking rate, 60%, 55%.
Okay.
Messages.
All right. So the way the screen reader works, and this will go for both Android, Samsung, and the iPhone. So if I just flick left and right on my screen.
Music, messages, Safari, phone, page 1 of wallet, camera.
Okay, so it's going backwards and forwards.
Wallet, page 1 of
element by element. All right. So if I'm in an app, a web page, or anything else, that's what it will do. If I drag my finger around the screen.
Wallet, dog, phone, 9 music.
Okay, it'll read back to me. And look, sometimes when I'm using a website, so for example, I use the Sensibo app, which I use for controlling my air conditioner. Now, I know on the Sensibo app that the control to increase the temperature on my website is right about here.
Actions
so
available.
I'm not going to flick through left and right on the screen because it's boring. I'm going to go straight to the spot and find it where it reads out me the control. But the thing about touching the screen,
wallet, camera,
or flicking left and right,
camera, photo, calendar,
is nothing will activate unless I then do a one finger double tap anywhere on the screen. Because as far as the screen reader is concerned, the last element that got spoken, whether it's an icon name, a button or anything else, belongs to the whole screen. So that's the way they all work on across both mobile devices, iOS and Android. And the other thing that's really fantastic, and let me just
messages, Safari, music,
open up
messages,
Safari.
Message, Safari, text field is support, English, open support chat, first time using Zoom, heading.
Oh, first time using Zoom. How about that? All right. So the way, now this is actually the magic. This is what I absolutely love about TalkBack on Android and on iOS is the power of this thing called the rotor, where you do a 2-finger rotate if you were turning a virtual dial. So if I do this now on this one.
Characters, edit, screen recognition, Braille auto advanced form controls.
So I've got form controls and tells me I've got 6.
Links.
9
links. Headings. 1 heading.
1 heading.
Containers. Browse screen input, activities.
And that's it for this current page, because that's all the elements. So what it actually does, it only fills, it fills in the elements in the rotor that are actually on the screen. So then if I really wanted to, I could flick up and down the screen, because remember when I said flicking left and right is only going left, up and down the screen, left to right, up and down, row by row. Flicking up and down moves by whatever element I'm navigating by. So if I had my rotor sitting on a heading and I flicked up and down with one finger, that's what it would move through. So I'd be moving through headings. And then what I normally do is when I get to the heading I want to start reading, then of course I flick to the right to start reading line by line. And that's how I navigate most of the websites that I come across. So as you can probably tell, when you navigate a website with a screen reader in particular, it's very intensive, because you've got to listen to all the object information plus the text, plus keep in mind where you're going, plus keep in mind what you want to get access to. There are some really cool things that I use all the time, and Charlie can remind me what the standard one is for the built-in websites in a minute, but it basically makes the screen read out to the person without you having to launch a screen reader. Because if you've got dyslexia or you've got fatigue issues visually, you don't need a full-blown screen reader. That's particularly for people that really can't see what's happening on the screen as such, and need to navigate via the keyboard or the touchscreen. So for example, on the Mac, I can do a shortcut key where if I press Command Escape, anything that's highlighted on my screen, whether it's in a web page, an email, a document, will be then spoken out by the computer's inbuilt speech. The other really cool one, and this is available in Microsoft Edge as well as Safari, and on Microsoft Edge it calls it Immersive Reader, and on Safari it just calls it Reader Mode. And what it does is it strips out all the HTML content. So let's say, for example, I was on the Sydney Morning Herald webpage and I found a really interesting article and I wanted to read it, but I didn't want to hear all the HTML elements on the page. On the Mac, I could just simply do Shift-Command-R. It strips out all the HTML content and just leaves the article text on the screen. So then as a low vision person, I could just do Command Escape, and all that would read to me would be the text of the actual article on the screen. Absolutely beautiful. And then when I wanted to put it back to normal, I just do on the Mac, Shift-Command-R, and hey presto, the standard HTML page is actually back. Charlie, what's the one, I know particular quantum technology uses it, but is it
read aloud? It's the one you're thinking of?
No, it's the other one. I know quantum uses it. It's a little button at the top of the page. It's called Browse Aloud. No,
Browse Aloud. Matt,
that's
do you have the name off the top of your head? I'm not sure if Matt's got mine at the moment.
That's okay. But look, it's really good. The shortcut key for that command again was Shift-Command-R to toggle between reader mode and standard mode, and to make Browse Aloud. Thank you. It's good I can actually hear the text going on here too. It's fantastic. And then to do that screen reader one, it's Command Escape, but you've got to turn it on in System Preferences Accessibility, and it's under spoken text. So that's actually a really, really good one. The other thing that I absolutely love about this day and age, and I wish I would have had a long time ago, is the invention of personal assistants to get information. And I include all of these. So I love my A-Lady on the Echo. I love my my Giggle, my Google Home one, and I also love Siri. Because the main thing about all this stuff is that simply by using my voice, I can get access to a lot of information without having to, ! navigate. Particularly if I want to find out bits of information, facts quickly, find out the weather, check the time, check my calendar, check the train times. I can simply just ask for it. I don't have to go onto a website, enter the details. I don't have to do anything. I just purely use my voice. So the fact that all the personal assistants do this now is absolutely brilliant. And one secret that I always tell people on my podcast is I'm an atrocious speller. So being a screen reader user for over 40 years, I'm a bit of a phonetic speller if I'm not being careful. And I hate the word yogurt. because I always misspell it. And when my wife reads our shopping list, she always starts laughing at me. And then now I simply just, before I do the famous yogurt one, I just ask, HEY Siri or anybody else I'm close to, how do you spell that word? And that's absolutely fantastic then. So that's actually really good. And the fact that you've got access to still have Cortana on the Surface Pro, and of course we have Siri on the Mac. And when you combine that with the fact that you've got built-in screen magnification, built-in speech, built-in screen reading, excuse me, and all the other accessibility tools for motor, physical, and cognitive, the fact these days that I can pick up any desktop operating system, any mobile device, is absolutely brilliant. But the age of personal assistance and voice recognition is brilliant. And also, speaking about voice recognition, is the fact that we've also got voice dictation now. So being able to voice dictate into things is a lot better. But finally, before my voice gives out, I find web developers and app developers are really keen to make their websites and their apps more accessible. They don't do it on purpose. They don't sit there in their little dark room where they're actually leaning over and crouching over their computer, making things nasty for disabled people. They just don't know. And I'm just going to have a drink of water because my throat's getting dry. Speaking of getting dry, how are we going for time, by the way, Charlie?
We're doing really well. We're at 12:30 my time, which I think is about half an hour behind the rest of everybody else. So no, we've got a good few minutes to go, and then we'll open up for questions.
Fantastic, that's good. So, and I'll give you a really good example about this. Geez, I want to say about 8 years ago, there was a really great app for the iPhone called Navigator. And you could get it for iOS and in different regions of the world. And it had this function called pedestrian mode, which is what we call walking mode now. And they had a second function called pedestrian mode with speech, because they thought, oh, well, a sighted person would want speech as they're perambling through a city. And then apparently they got too many people saying take it out because they found it too annoying. And they took it out, and then all of a sudden they got all these blind people contacting them and saying, what have you done for blind people? Don't you realize that this is one of the major applications that blind people use for navigating? And they had absolutely no idea that that was important to people with vision impairment. They just thought it was just an irritating thing they obviously put in there for, quote, standard users. And I think it was only about a week when they put it back again. So what I try and say to people is do not tear strips off developers, or whether they're app developers or anything else. They're trying hard. Sometimes they're only a very small group or even a single person. They're trying their best, and it's much nicer to give constructive feedback and saying, hey, by the way, did you realize that when you changed this, I couldn't do X, Y, and Z, or that sort of stuff? That's much more positive. And I was involved along with Digital Access in developing the ABC Listen app, particularly on the iPhone or iOS, and also to the ABC Triple J app as well. And it was great because, again, when you're talking directly to the developer, sometimes you can understand why they've had to do a certain thing. And sometimes it's very hard to make changes, and sometimes you might have to have a workaround. So I always say to people, just don't hit people over the head. They don't need it. But if people had to ask me, where we are compared to, like I said, 16 years ago, or even maybe 10 years ago, it's much better because people have choice now. I have choice of desktop operating systems. I have choice of mobile platforms, but I also have choice of screen reading technology that I use. So I did mention Narrator on Windows. The free screen reader that most people use, which is open source, is called NVDA, which stands for non-visual desktop access. And the one that's commercially available that people use in employment for Windows is called JAWS for Windows, which stands for Job Access with Speech. And you can get a demo of that runs for 40 minutes. You can also contact Quantum Technology. They can give you a license that runs for 90 days if you really want to test it, because the home version of JAWS Professional is $1,500, and the professional version, which you don't need for testing, is about $2,500, so quite expensive screen reader. For the Mac, we only have a choice of one screen reader, which is built in, of course, to the Mac, called VoiceOver. And as I mentioned, with iOS, it's only VoiceOver because it's Apple in their own lovely little Apple garden. And on Android and Samsung, particularly on Samsung, the default screen reader for Android is called TalkBack. The default screen reader for Samsung is called Voice Assistant. And I'd have to say, as a bit of a tester, you're probably better off testing on Voice Assistant initially, because it's very similar in a way to what VoiceOver does on iOS. TalkBack, which if you are using a Samsung product, you can also just download from the Play Store if you want to use it, because it's not on there by default. It's also very good, but it's a lot more difficult to use than what Voice Assistant is on Samsung. For example, it has these weird things called angled commands. So remember when I said with VoiceOver, I said you could flick left and right, one flicker, flick up and down to move by the rotor. Well, on TalkBack, you actually do one finger flick down or up, and then you can go left or right, or down the bottom, you can go left and right again. So they're called angle commands, and they can get really messy. But at the end of the day, don't put yourselves through, quote, hell by just turning any screen reader on manually, because you will feel like throwing your device out the window. Always turn it on via the keyboard shortcut, because then you can, or if it gets worse and you can't do something with the screen reader, you can turn it off easily. And that's either with using the keyboard on your desktop, using the shortcut keys on your mobile device, or using particularly Siri on the iPhone Upper Touch to turn things on and off. And just one final point I want to make is, people say to me, is there a particular system that I prefer? And the answer is no. I tend to use the application or the operating system that gives me the best opportunity at the best of time. So I know about 5 or 6 years ago, we used to say, oh, well, look, of course, if you're blind, you use iPhone. If you've got low vision, use Android. If you're low vision, it's probably better if you use a Mac. But if you're blind, use Windows. But that's really becoming irrelevant these days as we improve upon our browsers. So Safari is always getting improving, Microsoft Edge is improving, and so is Google Chrome's always improving. So the browsers are making a difference, but also to the third party or the built-in access technology on all those platforms is also making a huge difference. So there's no, should I put my effort into Android or should I put my effort into iOS, et cetera, et cetera. Every platform now is absolutely fine across the whole accessibility horizon. And I mean that especially for other disabilities. So whether you've got cognitive issues, literacy issues, physical issues, vision issues, hearing issues, anything you want to name, Microsoft, Google, Apple, Samsung and Amazon have really put themselves in there. So they've done a really good job. So look, like I said, 5 years ago, I would have said, don't worry about Android, just quietly, but now it's absolutely fine. So there you go. I think I'm finished rambling on a bit. I could talk a bit more, but I think I'll stop at this point.
That's awesome. And also it'll give us a chance to get into the questions. So if there is more that people would like to know, pop your questions into the Q&A box now. I see that there were a few questions that went into the general chat. If you could copy them into the Q&A just so that we make sure we don't miss them. We may have touched on some of the answers to the questions as we went through, but I will go through each question one at a time just to make sure that they've all been answered correctly. And I will invite you as well, Matt, if you want to jump in on some of these answers as we go through the questions. So our first question is from Wendy. I work mostly in PDF accessibility in forms. How should I deal with field labeling if you have a very, very long question to be answered? When a friend tested a form for me on JAWS. The only way she could read the full question was to move through the form using the down arrow rather than tabbing, but she needed to know to do that. And I think that could be an issue with, is there a certain number of characters that JAWS reads, David?
No.
Okay.
It's normally in the legend. I think it's called the legend. I'm out of web testing for a bit now, but look, I mean, what people sometimes do, particularly, it depends on what on the fields are. I mean, my attitude is, and gets back to for keeping form elements a bit shorter. I'm sorry, field elements with text a bit shorter, is if there's a form and you want to make sure that the person's putting in the correct information into the edit field, I normally have a bit of a blurb at the top of the form that actually says, please be aware when you fill in this form, can you read and make sure that you read the following information, because each particular field will need certain information in it. So that way then you can pretty much tab through and just listen to the first part of it. Because what you'll find most screen reader users only probably listen, and this is probably me personally, I only listen to about the first 10 to 12 words of a form field anyway. If it's any longer, then I just switch off anyway. Because if it's going to say something like first primary address of the person that owns this home, and if they're over 18 years old, please enter their name. I'm only going to listen to about the first half of that. So again, it's trying to be a lot more succinct. And that gets back to that cognitive thing too, is sometimes the more complicated you make things, particularly when people have English as a second language, or they really want plain text. I've always said the more busy and the more information you want somebody to cognitively digest, the harder it is for the person to use that formal web page. So the simpler it is, or the more concise it is, in some ways, the better off you are.
And that's often a catch-22. People try to over-explain themselves to make it easier, and can often make things a bit more convoluted by just adding more words to try and clarify what they're trying to say.
Yeah, and look, that's a hard thing to do, because I mean, I did mention the fact that, you know, click here drives my mad, or more information. So that one's easily fixed by just putting in, you know, for more information, please use this link to go to the about this job interview or something like that. It's really hard. It's one of those, you know, how much do I put in and how much do I not put in? And the other thing that I should always say with any of this stuff, which Wendy did anyway, is you always test this stuff with real quote users, and they'll give you some good solid feedback. But that's another way to do it. But yeah, it's hard just trying to get that mix of how much is too much and how much is too less.
Yeah, absolutely. A question from Mel. We're looking at adding 360 video and images to our website. How do these media score in terms of accessibility?
Ow.
Yeah. Same. Could you maybe elaborate on that, please, Mel? I'll leave that one up there, and I'll move on to the next one just so we get some clarification on it. Can Alexa use Google services and calendar, etc.?
Hang on, what was the start of that one again, Charlie? Sorry.
Can Alexa use Google services and calendar?
Absolutely. Yep. 100%. Could I just get back to that video one? Sometimes with a video, and if it's going to be absolutely horrendous for anybody to actually access that, I love people that put transcriptions for their videos, which is what we're supposed to do anyway. So because it gets back to this old question that I mentioned before, is does me going through all the benefit of doing something with this video to make it, quote, 100% accessible for everybody work, or does the fact that I have a valid alternative, i.e. transcript for a video, work just as well? And when you've got transcript for a video, I will often just go straight to the transcript rather than even trying to watch the video, because unfortunately particularly on YouTube, I mean, hardly anybody, you know, audio describes or has a transcription, but I love websites that have gone to the trouble of making transcriptions for video content. And that's particularly important if you're deaf, because unless the video has got closed captionings on it, then a deaf person can't read the screen and hear what's happening. So I always say to people, for videos, and again, does it add to the user's experience? And if it doesn't, then wholeheartedly put a transcription in which will then cover the video, and you can then say that, yes, I've got an alternative for that particular option on my website.
Another question from Mel for David. Are apps generally more accessible because of all the added accessibility features on the devices, or do app developers and content creators still need to be really conscious of accessibility? It's an excellent question.
Yeah, if they, this is the age-old question. If they follow the guidelines, exclamation mark, in the Google Toolkit or in the iOS Developer Toolkit, then yes, it will work. It's when people start doing odd things with apps that things can get a bit off-putting. I'd have to say, probably at about this is going to sound very weird, but I am a tester. Out of the 4,500 apps that I've downloaded over the last 10 years, I'd probably say about 2,500 were accessible out of the box, which is a pretty good ratio. So no, the one thing that always holds me up on applications though in general is when they've got this little overlay screen to begin with, and it might be a little welcome screen. It's those little pop-up windows which unfortunately screen readers don't recognize, and I'm sitting there going flick, flick, flick on the screen, nothing's happening, and all it is a welcome to this app button that I can't access. And then of course the rest of the application could be perfectly accessible, but that initial opening welcoming screen, which doesn't have a proper control on it, can stop me using the application. But I'd have to say on the whole, the experience of me using apps out of the box, so things like YouTube, where are we, Audible, Kindle, White Pages, TripView, all those sort of, Spotify, Google Maps, all those sort of ones are fantastic. And of course, when I have to use, I'll just make sure my thing's muted, Amazon Alexa for my Amazon Echo and the app on my iPhone or my Android device. I have to use Google Home to get access to my Google, or I use HomeKit or just Siri herself to access my smart controls in my house, then they're fine. Another good example of this, and I'll just do this really quickly because I'll get sidetracked again. Sometimes the website becomes more accessible than the app, which is quite weird. So for example, remember when I said before with Sensibo, how I could access that plus button on the bottom right-hand side of the screen? The main reason for that is because in iOS 14, and this is it gets back to that good question about, is it the access technology making a difference? Because what Apple has done now, it's invoked a new function called voice recognition mode. And what that does, it tries to recognize images and controls on an app and then assign a particular element to that option. So rather than me hearing just button on the Sensibo app, I now hear image plus button. Whereas for me to access that app properly, I have to go to the website and use the Sensibo interface that way, and things work normally. But because Apple has put this voice recognition and voice imaging control now in iOS 14, that has brought up my experience of accessibility, I'd say by about good 30%.
Awesome. A question from Tara, what was the Apple shortcut to the easy screen reader?
For voice, okay, so for, hang on the Mac or on the?
I think on the Mac, I think for the, just the document read, cutting out all the HTML.
Yep, Command Escape. Command key plus escape, and you've got to turn it on in System Preferences Accessibility, and it's under Spoken Text. And it just says shortcut key, speak any selected text when I press a shortcut key. Command Escape's to the default, but you can make it anything you like.
Excellent. Question from Andrew, given it's 2020, how do you now approach business owners who do not want to spend budget on making websites accessible? I came up against this fairly recently, not as a we don't want to make it accessible, but kind of a, oh, does it cost that much? We're a bit worried about budget. And this is something that it's really interesting because businesses spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to build an application or to build a piece of software or to build a product and make it as, as saleable and and perfect as they can. And then as soon as they start looking at accessibility, they go, oh, that's a bit much. It's a bit costly. But by making it accessible, you actually open up the market so much further. You'll be able to sell it so much easier. So that really sells itself, in that if you put the money in now, then your product will actually be so much more valuable and so much easier to sell. You will know that whoever has in their procurement documents that whatever they purchase must be accessible, that you are 100% accessible out of the box. Where I know a lot of companies that have purchased CMS systems, all different kinds of software products, and part of their procurement was, is this product accessible? And the salesperson at that end says, yes, absolutely, we think. And then when someone's bought it and they're locked in, they're signed in for a contract for a certain term of use, suddenly they find out that it's not accessible. And then that organization has to then go and retrofit all of the accessibility because they signed a contract saying that their product was accessible. The purchaser has found out that it's not, so the vendor then has to go and fix it. So get it done first. So that's really my push, is that you're opening up to another 20% of the population. So you're increasing your customer base by making something accessible. So that's generally where I go with that one.
Actually, it's funny, Charlie, because I just wish Apple and the whole lot of them would get rid of this get rid of this accessibility tag, because I find if I just call it universal personalizations for anyone on the planet or personalizations in general, it gets away from that sort of stigma, because there's still that slight stigma attached to accessibility. So I often hear mainstream journalists, tech journalists going, I don't quite know why this particular feature is under accessibility because I don't have any accessibility issues. So why is it in there for? So I just think as long as we hang on to this accessibility tab, because we're not just talking about accessibility for people with a disability, we're talking about anybody who might have an issue at any particular time. I mean, you might have had a late night and can't bear looking at the very light screen because it's hurting your eyes. Or you might have issues with your hearing because you've been at a heavy metal band, so you need to adjust the accessibility stuff for the audible stuff, the audio stuff. So I don't know how we're going to get there eventually, but I'll just keep whinging about this from Apple, because under system preference on the Mac, it used to be called universal access, and now it's just called accessibility across the whole ecosystem. But I just wish they just changed it to personalization, because it really does get away from that stigma, and it opens it up, as we just said, to an extra 20% of the population who might just need a little bit of extra assistance every now and again.
Yeah, excellent point. It's so true. As soon as you start talking about things for people with disability, it becomes an us and them situation. And it's like you're doing more to do something for people that you don't even know use your product, but everybody using your product will benefit from it being accessible, and universally accessible is definitely the way to go.
Absolutely.
So, question from Paul. Hi, Charlie. Hi, David. A lot of WCAG guides also apply to PDF files. Are there any particular pitfalls PDF creators need to be aware of? David, what are your thoughts on page headers and footers?
Love page headers. Don't know about footers though. I'm not fond of page footers in general. But look, I love structured PDF files, because again, it comes back to when I said about virtual screen reading on web pages for headings and elements and form fields. That's exactly what VoiceOver does, what JAWS Narrator does on Windows. It helps you navigate the PDF page as if it was a virtual document, and they work absolutely beautifully. So as soon as I hear the word structured PDF file, rather than thinking it's time for me to go and hide under the closest bush and never come out again, it's like, oh, that means I can give this document a fair go at the end of the day. But look, the other thing, and I know government departments are very big on PDF files, but I normally say to people, look, if you at all have an alternative, and I don't know what our standing on this, Charlie, is from a digital access point of view, but I know personally, if I had a choice between a PDF document and a HTML document or a Word document, I'd take a HTML document or a Word document any day over a PDF file.
And I think it comes down again to personal preference. I mean, we definitely push for correctly tagged and correctly created PDF documents. We do run training on those for anybody who wants to learn more about it. And I do have some links to our training at the end of the presentation. So I'll share those as well. But PDFs can be really troublesome if they haven't been created correctly.
That's right. And look, and it's not, and if it's not created correctly, you really put people off accessing it. So even so, you'll actually win points from screen reader users if you've got structured PDF tags, because people actually realize that you've gone to an effort to, try and make them accessible rather than not bothering. And the other thing about PDF files is a lot of PDF files have got images in them. So people think, oh, it's an electronic document, it's a PDF file, but no, it's actually an image of a text file inside a PDF file. So again, make sure it's text, structured, and people that use screen readers in particular will absolutely love it.
Now we are running out of time here very rapidly. I'll do one more question, and the rest we will send out in an email later, either today or tomorrow, just so that we do get to answer everybody's questions and we don't run horribly over time. So question for David: what's your experience of accessing social media feeds? Do browsers allow you to turn HTML off and have social media served up as plain text?
No. no to the last bit. Twitter, I absolutely love Twitter because I guess it's got that short form text, and when you've only got 140 or 280 characters on it. So I absolutely adore, love, embrace, use Twitter absolutely every single day of my life. In fact, when my iPhone complains that I've spent 20 hours roughly a day using my iPhone, I go, oh, that's good. I'm working really well today, rather than going, oh, naughty me, I shouldn't be on my iPhone so much. Facebook is really, really good because it's driven by headers. So when I want to navigate by heading, it uses actually heading 5 for the main conversation, and the sub conversations are heading level 6. So the one cool thing about screen readers, if I want to jump by heading 555, I can do that, which means I skip all over the heading 6s, which I don't have to actually concern myself with. And it's similar experience on whether I'm using the mobile version or just the Facebook app on my iPhone or Android device, or using web pages. So Facebook and Twitter are absolutely excellent. I use a lot of emailing lists. They're also fantastic. I haven't used other social media platforms like Pinterest or any of those sort of ones because I find them, they're just a bit too visual. And now we're in Facebook, particularly where they've got that automatic engine now, which will say, person in field, stand in front of horse, left of stream. So it tries to tell you what's happening. That's also very brilliant as well. Excuse me. That's it for that question.
I will have to start to wrap things up there. We do have a few more questions open, but I will send out the answers to those. There are a few for you, David, so if you don't mind, I'll send them to you. If you don't mind answering them, I'll send them as an email later. I'll just go back to sharing my screen so we can wrap things up. So, okay. Where to from here? Start by talking to people with disability, start by checking your alt text, start by checking your form labels, start by checking your color contrast, your heading levels, adding skip links, checking keyboard focus, checking your tab order, start by commissioning a baseline audit, start by doing start today, repeat tomorrow. That's sort of my final little push to get people start. All of those things are easy things that you can do to really start bringing accessibility into your online content and your digital content. As I mentioned, we do have some upcoming trainings. So in November, we've got creating accessible documents. So that's Word and PDF. Advanced creating accessible documents, so that's for PDF, and we also have a separate one for Microsoft Office. Web accessibility techniques and testing, inclusive design, accessible communications and marketing, and writing for the web, writing in plain English. I will pop a link to those trainings into the chat, and if anyone would like to contact Digital Access, our email address, website, and again, the training link I've popped up on screen and I will put into the chat as well. And anyone who would like to contact David, his Twitter, his Apple Podcast link, and also his email are on screen now as well, but I'll share them to the chat. Thank you so much to everybody for attending today. I hope that you enjoyed it and found it really helpful. I will stop sharing my screen. I will share those links for everybody, and we'll get the answers to the leftover questions out to you, and we'll also provide transcripts and captioning for this video and send it out as well to anyone who would like to rewatch, to anyone who would like to share, and it will also be going up on our YouTube. Have a fantastic day, everybody. Thank you so much again for attending. We really appreciate it. We do have another one coming up in October, which will be on digital accessibility and the law, which is a really interesting topic as well. So we will send you out the details for those also. But thank you again. I will find these links that I've got on my PowerPoint here somewhere and share them with everybody.